They left me on the side of a back road in Ohio, with nothing but a small suitcase and a bottle of water. No phone. No money. Just dust on my shoes and betrayal in my chest. At 72 years old, after burying the man I'd loved for over 5 decades, my own children, Ethan and Rachel, drove off without a backward glance. I stood there, stunned, watching the car disappear behind a curtain of gravel and sunlight. People talk about heartbreak like it's poetic. But standing there in the middle of nowhere, I learned that real heartbreak is silent, heavy, like a weight settling in your bones. It wasn't until I looked down at my hands, still rough from tending blueberries, that I felt something shift inside me. Something old. Something dangerous. They thought they'd broken me. But how do you break a woman who built a life from dirt and rain? And more importantly, what do you think she does next? Let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Margaret Ellis. Most folks call me Maggie. I was born and raised in Willow Creek, a small farming town in southern Ohio where summer smells like ripening fruit and wood smoke. And everyone knows your business whether you want them to or not. Henry, my husband, and I spent over 40 years building a life on our 15-acre blueberry farm. We weren't rich, but we were proud. We raised 2 kids, poured everything we had into the soil and into them. But somewhere along the way, our children changed, or maybe they just stopped pretending. When Henry got sick, we kept it quiet. Bone cancer. Slow and cruel. He said he didn't want the kids to worry. Truth was, they hadn't come home in years, not unless they wanted something. Ethan, my son, always chasing some promotion in Chicago. Rachel, bouncing from failed business to failed marriage, calling only when she needed money. They arrived just in time for the funeral, and just in time to spring their plan. It started with soft voices and concerned expressions. "You can't run the farm alone, Mom." Dad would have wanted us to help. But then came the new will. The paperwork. The pressure. Suddenly, my home wasn't mine. My name wasn't on anything. My presence became inconvenient. And when they realized I wouldn't go quietly, they did the unthinkable. Left me behind like I was nothing. But here's the part they didn't count on. I had my own secrets. My own plans. And they had no idea who they'd just crossed. The funny thing about being left behind is how quickly survival kicks in, especially when you're a farm woman. I stood on that roadside, the spring wind tugging at my jacket, and took a deep breath. It smelled like damp earth and wild lilacs, the kind of scent that reminded me I still belonged to something, somewhere. And that's when I stopped shaking. See, Ethan and Rachel thought they'd stripped me of everything. But they didn't know about the fireproof box Henry and I had hidden behind the flannel shirts in our closet. They didn't know about the 5 acres of land still in my maiden name, land with the original water rights. They didn't know that in my purse, nestled next to my blood pressure meds, was a copy of the deed, a burner phone, and a name I hadn't said out loud in years. Walt Hammond, Henry's old army buddy and our lawyer. I started walking, not toward the gas station they mentioned, but toward town. 2 miles of gravel and silence, just me and the sound of my own heartbeat, getting steadier with every step. By the time I reached Willow Creek's lone grocery store, my feet were blistered, but my mind was razor sharp. Ray Miller, the owner, was stocking the soda fridge when he saw me walk in. "Maggie," he blinked. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "No, Ray," I said with a smile that probably looked more like a snarl. "I've seen 2. I asked to use his phone. No questions, no hesitation. That's the kind of man Ray is. I called Walt. The line clicked, and the moment I heard his voice, I didn't even need to explain. "I know why you're calling," he said. "Been waiting for it." That's when I realized I wasn't alone. Not really. Because in a town like ours, people remember who plants the food, who shows up when barns burn down, who hands out pies to neighbors during hard winters. And they also remember who takes and who gives. My kids thought I was just a grieving widow, but they forgot I was also the woman who once chased a fox out of her coop with a broken rake and a prayer. And now I was chasing something else, truth. And I had every intention of dragging it into the light. By the time I made it to Walt's office above the old post office, my legs were stiff, my lips dry, and every step reminded me I wasn't 20 anymore, but I didn't care. Because what I carried in my purse was heavier than my bones, heavier than grief. It was proof. Proof that my children didn't just lose their way, they tried to erase me. Walt opened the door before I even knocked. He looked older than the last time I saw him, back when Henry and I had updated our wills after his first health scare. But his eyes, steel blue and steady, hadn't changed. He led me inside without a word, poured 2 cups of black coffee, and sat down across from me like we had all the time in the world. "They forged Henry's signature," I said, my voice low but certain. "And they're planning to sell the farm to Golden Summit Properties next week." He didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder, our real will. "They showed up last week," he said, tapping the folder. "Tried to get me to sign off on a version I've never seen. Said you were too unwell to manage things alone." I felt the sting rise in my chest again, not just anger, but insult. Too unwell? The same woman who ran that farm, rain or shine, for 4 decades. Who raised 2 kids with bare hands and broken fingernails. They must have thought widowhood meant weakness. But losing Henry hadn't broken me, it had unleashed me. Walt and I spent the next hour plotting, not revenge, but justice. There's a difference. We froze the business accounts and filed an emergency injunction to halt any sale of the property. Walt contacted the county records office to block any transfer of land titles without my signature. And then I made a call of my own to Sophia Bishop, editor of the Willow Creek Chronicle, and the only journalist I trusted. I told her everything. The forged will, the betrayal, the development deal that would rip out our berry fields to build luxury homes for out-of-towners who'd never dirted their boots. As I hung up, I looked out Walt's window at the heart of the town Henry and I had loved so fiercely. It was quiet, almost too quiet. But I knew better. Storms don't always start with thunder. Sometimes, they begin with a single voice saying, "Enough." That day, I became that voice. And I was just getting started. The next morning, I stood on the front porch of Lucille's Bakery. The smell of cinnamon rolls and fresh bread wrapping around me like an old quilt. I hadn't slept much. My mind was too sharp, too awake. There's something terrifyingly clear about betrayal. It strips away illusion. And once you've seen someone for who they truly are, you can't unsee it. That morning, I wasn't the grieving widow anymore. I wasn't Mom or Maggie from the Berry Farm. I was the woman who had been left behind, and I had every intention of making sure no one forgot what my children had done. The town was starting to buzz. Sophia's front page article had dropped like a stone in still water. Forgery, fraud, and a family farm on the line. People were reading it over coffee, whispering behind newspapers, texting one another with wide eyes. And for the first time since Henry died, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. Ethan and Rachel were still in town, hiding in plain sight. Ethan had returned to the farmhouse, our farmhouse, as if he belonged there. Rachel had checked into the inn on Main Street, pretending nothing was wrong, still strutting around in designer shoes paid for with my husband's money. But I knew they felt the walls closing in. Walt had filed the court documents. The bank had frozen access to all shared business accounts. And I had just one more call to make, this one to Thomas Ward, the assistant district attorney. He was my neighbor's son, someone I'd known since he was 12, and I told him everything. By the time I hung up, I could feel the tide shifting. But the part that twisted the knife deeper wasn't what they did with the will. It was what they did after. That same afternoon, Ethan showed up at Lucille's while I was sipping sweet tea in the back room. He knocked once, then walked right in like he had a right to be there. "You need to stop," he said, not with fear, but with that same cold entitlement that had crept into his voice years ago. "You're embarrassing yourself. This is going to get ugly." I stood up, slow and steady, and walked until we were eye to eye. "Son," I said, "it got ugly the moment you left your mother on the side of a road like a piece of trash." He blinked. And in that tiny moment, I saw it, the smallest flicker of shame. But it wasn't enough. I wasn't after guilt. I was after accountability. And I wasn't going to stop until I got it. Not for me. Not even for Henry. But for every woman who's ever been underestimated, and every legacy that deserves to be protected. That night, I packed up the few things I had at Lucille's and asked her for a ride. Not to the courthouse, not to Walt's office, but home. My home. The farmhouse where I'd cooked Sunday breakfasts for 40 years. Where Henry and I had danced slow in the kitchen when the radio played Merle Haggard just right. The same home Ethan now sat in, acting like he'd earned the right to rearrange the furniture and pour himself a drink at my table. I'd had enough of hiding, enough of letting the lawyers handle my children like they were strangers.
No.
This part I had to do myself. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the trees when we pulled into the driveway. Lucille reached for my hand, but I shook my head. "Wait here," I said. "I won't be long." The gravel crunched under my shoes as I stepped out, the familiar sound somehow sharper, heavier. I could feel the ghosts of my life here. Every Christmas, every summer harvest, every argument and apology humming beneath the porch boards. When I opened the door, the smell hit me first. Not the warm scent of blueberry pie or Henry's cedar pipe, but cologne, Ethan's expensive kind. The house felt colder, even though the heat was on, like something sacred had been disturbed. He was sitting in the living room, shirt sleeves rolled, his laptop open on my mother's antique table. He looked up, startled. "Mom." That word again, like it still held weight. "We need to talk," I said, calm and steady. "No more lies. No more paperwork. Just truth." He didn't move. "You can't stay here," he said. "The deal's almost closed. You're making this harder than it needs to be." I walked past him, into the kitchen, and opened the cabinet above the fridge, the one no one ever looked in but me. Inside, just as I'd left it, was the leather-bound copy of Henry's journal. I turned, held it up. "Did you think I wouldn't have a backup? Did you really think your father trusted you more than me?" His face drained of color, because he knew what that journal held: notes, dates, intentions. Real thoughts. Henry's thoughts. The last few weeks of his life, he'd written everything down, especially about the land, about the kids, about the will. "You don't want to do this," Ethan said, his voice quieter now. "You're going to ruin us." I walked toward him and set the book gently on the table. "No, son," I said. "You ruined yourselves. I'm just here to make sure the story ends with the truth." And with that, I walked out of the house, leaving the door open behind me, just long enough for him to feel the weight of it all. By sunrise the next day, the wheels were already in motion, and this time, they were mine. I wasn't waiting for Ethan or Rachel to come to their senses. I knew better now. People like them don't wake up one day and grow a conscience. No, what they understand is pressure,
Loss.
consequence. So I gave them all three. Walt filed a motion to freeze all farm-related assets, every bank account, every share, every scrap of legal ownership they thought they'd snatched. By mid-morning, I had my meeting with the Environmental Board, and just like Henry and I planned years ago, I revealed the conservation easements we'd quietly put in place on our original 5 acres. Those restrictions made building on that land nearly impossible without jumping through federal hoops. You can't put up luxury townhouses on protected soil, not legally, anyway. And then came the phone call that turned everything upside down. Sophia called from the Chronicle office, her voice crackling with excitement. "Maggie," she said, "you're not going to believe this, but a reporter from the Cleveland Herald just picked up your story. They're running it statewide. And guess what? Golden Summit's been in trouble before, 3 different lawsuits for shady deals in the last year alone." My breath caught, not because I was surprised, but because I knew what that meant. This wasn't just about my land anymore. It was about exposing a pattern, a system, and I had just become the person who cracked it wide open. By lunchtime, Rachel had called twice, left long, rambling voicemails full of half apologies and frantic worry. "Mom, I didn't know Ethan planned to leave you on the road. I swear," she cried. I thought we were helping. Please, can we talk? But I didn't call back.
Not yet.
Because just like her brother, Rachel didn't feel bad about what she'd done. She felt bad it didn't work. Then the third call came. This one from a number I hadn't seen in years. Robert Dawson, Henry's old college friend, now one of the top real estate attorneys in the state.
Heard what happened, he said.
I owe Henry more than I can ever repay. If you want to take this all the way, I'll be in Willow Creek tomorrow morning. I looked out the window of Walt's office, where I'd taken up temporary residence, and saw the wind moving through the berry rows like waves. I smiled, not out of joy, but something firmer. Firmer than anger. Firmer than grief. Justice. Because when they tried to erase me, they forgot something crucial. I was still here. Still standing. And I knew this land better than anyone alive. Now I was about to prove it. By the time Robert Dawson's car rolled into Willow Creek the next morning, the town already felt different. People were watching now. Not just whispering at the diner or skimming headlines over coffee. They were paying attention. And in a place like ours, that matters. When a widow starts fighting back against her own children and a big city developer in the same breath, it rattles folks. It makes them sit up straighter, remember who they are and who they're not. Robert stepped out of his car in a crisp gray suit and a pair of boots that didn't match, but the man wasn't here for fashion. He was here for a fight. He shook my hand with a firm grip and said, "Let's take your land back, Maggie." And for the first time in weeks, I felt the weight in my chest ease, just a little. We met in Walt's office with paperwork stacked like sandbags before a storm. Robert read every forged clause, every manipulated date, and every so-called witnessed signature on the fraudulent will Ethan had shoved in my face. He nodded once, then twice, his jaw tightening. "We're going to bury them in their own lies," he said calmly. I didn't say much. I didn't have to. Every document we needed was already there. Every invoice, every title, every donation ledger Henry and I had kept over 40 years, all stored neatly in the boxes they'd once called old junk. By noon, Robert had drafted legal notices that not only blocked Golden Summit's claim to the land but initiated a formal complaint to the state attorney general's office.
Fraud. Elder exploitation.
Environmental violations. The works. He didn't just play defense, he struck first.
Hard.
And by that evening, a cease and desist letter had been delivered to Ethan's temporary office at the farm. Hand-delivered, no less, by Thomas Ward himself, who'd taken one look at the forged will and said, "They'll be lucky to get out of this without a record." I watched from across the street as Ethan read the letter, standing on the porch that Henry built with his own hands. He folded it slowly, glanced around like he couldn't quite believe what was happening, that the woman he left behind had turned the town against him. But he was wrong. I didn't turn the town, they chose. And when people have to pick between a woman who brought blueberry pies to every school fundraiser and a man who couldn't be bothered to send a card on his father's last birthday, well, the choice makes itself. I didn't gloat. I didn't cheer. I just stood tall, watching the sun dip low over the berry rows. I hadn't won yet, but the ground was shifting, and this time, I wasn't the one on shaky footing. The next day, the air in Willow Creek felt thick with something unspoken, like a storm was about to break. Word had spread fast. The town knew what Ethan and Rachel had done. The forged will, the backroom deal with Golden Summit, the quiet attempt to erase their mother. But now, they also knew what I had done. And I could feel the shift in how people looked at me, not with pity but with a kind of quiet respect. I wasn't just the widow down the lane anymore. I was a woman standing her ground. And the ones who used to wave from across the street now crossed it to shake my hand. That afternoon, Walt, Robert, and I sat across the long oak conference table, waiting. At exactly 3:58 p.m., the door opened. Ethan walked in first, shoulders square, but eyes tired. Rachel followed a step behind, her heels clicking too loudly in the quiet room. She looked pale, like sleep hadn't been her friend lately. Neither of them met my eyes. Robert slid the paperwork forward without saying a word. Final agreements, legally binding, to relinquish all claims to the farm, the house, the business, and any future profits. Ethan glanced through the pages with the detached focus of a man trying not to flinch. Rachel didn't even pretend to read them. She just stared at the pen. "I still don't understand how you turned everyone against us," Ethan muttered. "We're your children." I leaned forward, folding my hands on the table. "No," I said, my voice steady. "You stopped being my children the day you left me on the side of a road and drove away." Robert cleared his throat. "If you'd like to avoid fraud charges, this is your chance. Sign, and you walk away clean. Don't, and we proceed with criminal action." Rachel grabbed the pen with shaking fingers. Her signature scratched across the paper like it couldn't wait to be finished. Ethan paused just a moment longer before finally pressing ink to page. When it was over, I gathered the signed documents, stood, and looked at the two people I once rocked to sleep. "I want you out of Willow Creek by morning. Don't come back.
Don't call.
Don't write. Your father left a legacy rooted in honesty and hard work. You nearly destroyed it. I won't let you near it again." They didn't argue, didn't apologize. They just left. And as the door closed behind them, something inside me did too. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt resolved. Because justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks out quietly, head high, heart intact, and hands finally free. That night, for the first time in months, I slept in my own bed. Not the one above Lucille's bakery. Not the spare room at Walt's. My bed, right where Henry left it, quilted with years of memories, stitched with quiet devotion. I laid there in the dark, listening to the creaks in the floorboards, the rustle of wind against the window panes, the way our old house breathed like something alive. There were no footsteps from down the hall, no whispered arguments, no doors slamming shut behind my children's pride. Just silence, the kind I'd earned. And in that stillness, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in a long while.
Peace.
In the days that followed, I went back to the fields. The blueberries were budding early, and the smell of new life was everywhere. I hired Lisa Thompson, Martin's daughter, as the new farm manager. She was young, bright, and hardworking, everything Ethan pretended to be in a suit. I watched her move through the rows like she'd been born in that soil. Henry would have liked her. Said she had grit. Together, we walked the land, reviewing irrigation lines, checking on fencing, planning the harvest schedule like I used to with him every spring. The farm didn't just come back to life, it stood taller. Sophia kept calling with updates. The Chronicle story had gone statewide, then national. Golden Summit CEO had been indicted on charges of land fraud and elder exploitation. Our case was the thread that unraveled everything. I should have felt satisfaction. And maybe, somewhere beneath exhaustion, I did. But mostly, I felt this quiet determination. To rebuild. To protect. To honor. I started the paperwork to open the Henry Ellis Agricultural Fund, a scholarship for local kids who wanted to study sustainable farming. We talked about doing it for years, but life always got in the way. Now I had the time and the reason. I scheduled the first harvest supper in the barn for early fall, open to every neighbor who had stood by me. Tables of homegrown food, live music, laughter echoing under beams that had once held our hopes. This was the future Henry and I dreamed of. Not condos. Not quick cash. Just roots, deep, strong, lasting. And every evening, I sat on the porch in his rocking chair, watching the sun dip low behind the berry rows, knowing the land was safe, the legacy intact. My children were gone, and that hurt. But what remained was mine. Earned. Defended.
Whole.
I wasn't alone. I was free. And that I finally understood was enough.